Our reading this morning is 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we have boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. But just as we've been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so to speak, not to please man, but to please God, who tests our hearts. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed, God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. We worked night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you, while we proclaimed you the gospel of God. You are witnesses. God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our contact toward you believers. For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory.
If you weren't here last week, where were you? You missed out. I'm kidding. It's great to have you here. You missed out. It was the first of our series called Transforming Community, which we began last week. And we're looking together through this section of the New Testament. It's a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to a group of Christians in a city called Thessalonica. And so we saw that beginning last week. And it was written from Paul, the Apostle, but his team as well. We've got with him a guy called Silvanus, otherwise known as Silas, and Timothy, a sort of trainee who's joined the leadership team to learn the ropes, and then himself one day will be sent off to plant and strengthen churches as well. And so we're looking at this letter from the perspective of transforming community. It informs our ideas of what we're trying to do together as a church and what we're to be like. And I hope that that community that is built on God's word and filled with God's Spirit will be transforming to you, in that as you come and join the church, you are transformed more and more into the image of Jesus. And that's a wonderful thing, and the world will thank you for that. Well, some of it will anyway. But a wonderful thing when people are more like Jesus out in the world. And so this week we're going to be looking, I suppose, at this section here, and I think it teaches us of two attributes that build transforming community. And we see them here, and I'll tell you what they are. The first attribute is authenticity, and the second attribute is missionality, being missional, being authentic and being missional. And if we can have both of these things alive and growing in our church, then that will indeed help to build transforming community. So let's think of the first attribute then, authenticity. What does this mean, by the way? What does it mean for a church, for a community to be authentic? You might know already. It means to be genuine, right? It means to be transparent. It means that your inner thoughts and beliefs match up perfectly to what you say, to how you live, how you behave. That's what it means to be authentic. There's no sort of differentiation between your private thoughts and your public actions. I suppose the opposite would be hypocrisy, where you believe one thing and you do another, or you say you believe one thing and do another. So this is authentic. What's going on inside matches what happens on the outside. And Paul and his team striving for an authentic ministry in Thessalonica. They planted this church in this city by telling the gospel, by gathering new believers together, and then by instilling these values into their community, built around Jesus, values of authenticity and of teaching about Jesus and living for Jesus. And that will have a huge impact on their city as they go forward. So let's see where we get these things from. How do we know this is an authentic community? For example, in verse 3, Paul says, "Our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive." Our appeal being our proclamation of Jesus and our call for all people to repent and turn to him and believe. He says that appeal does not spring from these three words, error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. In other words, he's saying we don't have any ulterior motives here in our preaching of Jesus. And again, he lists another three negatives in verse 5. He says, "We never came to you with words of flattery, nor with a pretext for greed, God is witness, nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or others." This is someone trying to live this authentic value. "I'm not trying to fool you," says Paul. "We're not trying to manipulate you for our own gain. We're not trying to gain power and glory and money and prestige." Paul did not come to them and preach this sort of half-baked gospel, this easy listening gospel, this message that you're not so bad and God kind of loves you anyway. No, he didn't do any of that. No self-serving false teaching or podium building. No, here's how we know that he was authentic and building an authentic community among them. He says in verse 2, pointing to his own experience, "We had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know. We had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict." We saw the background to this in our series earlier in the year as we looked at Acts chapter 16. We went through the exploits of the early church. And in Acts chapter 16, we see Paul, who wrote this letter, and Silas, also known as Silvanus here, arrested in Philippi, another city nearby to Thessalonica. They were arrested because they freed a girl who had been enslaved by an evil spirit, been enslaved by a demon. She was also enslaved by humans as well. She was a piece of property, so to speak. And so they freed her from this demon, and her owners, as I said, were not happy with this arrangement because she had made quite a lot of money for them. And so as such, Paul and Silas were arrested, they were beaten, they were placed in stocks, fixings around their ankles and most likely their wrists as well. They were thrown in jail, despite the fact that they were Roman citizens. They were denied their rights. And yet during the night, God miraculously freed them. It's an incredible story. You can read it in Acts chapter 16. But after they left the city, or after Paul left the city, they came to Thessalonica, which is where this letter was written to. And after preaching the gospel there, same thing happened. Angry mobs were roused that chased them out of town. And so Paul is drawing attention to all this briefly in his letter in verse 2, and he's saying, look, this is how you know we are preaching the authentic gospel. We are authentically preaching you the true gospel. This is how you know, because we are bold and we keep going despite threats and mobs and people trying to shut us down. That's how you know we're not in it for ourselves, we're not in it for the money or for the glory or for the power or anything like that. Quite the opposite, we get beaten. But that's not all. Because even I suppose, if they're sincere and they're preaching this gospel, they could be sincerely wrong. I mean, it has happened in the past. They could just be wrong about that, even though they're very sincere and enthusiastic in their preaching. But that's not, again, according to Paul anyway, that's not what he sees. In verse 4, he says, we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, and so we speak. Not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. So the apostle is very aware that he was called by God, he received the gospel from God, he was charged by God to go out and make Christ known throughout the Gentile world. verse 10. He says, look at how we were among you. We were holy, we were righteous, we were blameless in our conduct towards you. And he stands before them with a clean conscience. Right? He says, you know our story, you've heard our message of the gospel, you've noted our conduct, God knows our hearts, and we have been faithful to the call that he has placed upon us. You see, Paul and his team bore physically and mentally even the cost of being authentic, of living these authentic values within the community. Then he turns from, I suppose, negatives to positives, further evidence of this value of authenticity that's so key to the church. We're not this, we're not this, we're not this, we're not this. But then he talks about two pictures of the way that they as apostolic leaders, missionaries, have been with the church. He says in verse 7, it's very remarkable. He says in verse 7, this is what we were like. He says, we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. That's what we were like when we came to you, O church. There are few relationships that we know either from personal experience or from observation that are more tender and loving than a mother with her young child. We just get this picture, don't we, here of nurture and caring and feeding and protecting and nourishing. And Paul the Apostle said, that's how we were among you. This is how we exercised our God-given authority as a doting mother with her child. Just like that. Such tenderness and such love from the apostle to the people. That was their experience of their leaders. But not only as a mother, he points to this other member of the family as well. He says in verse 11, for you know how like a father with his children, we exhorted, that is, we strongly encouraged each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Not only were we like a mother, loving, caring, nurturing, feeding, but we were like a father, exhorting, encouraging, saying, come on, you can do this. Walk in the manner worthy of God. Directing them, charging them to live in a certain behavior, disciplining them. I'm not saying that mothers can't do this any more that fathers can't nurture young children. They can. But the point that Paul is doing is using these sort of complementary parental functions to lay out the breadth of their love and care for the believers at Thessalonica. And it's just a beautiful picture to use this mother and father analogy for the spiritual children in the church. In fact, I think I might struggle to think of other places in Scripture where the spiritual leader refers to the people in such warm and tender and relational ways as we see here between Paul and the Thessalonian church. Paul clearly had a deep love for these believers. And it's authentic, to use a modern term. It's not contrived. It's not put on for the crowd, like an act. It's not just a clever way to gain popularity and to curry favor. No. This love that we see here is authentic. It is without duplicity. It is without underhanded motives. And Paul, as we shall see, modeled that to the church, that they may continue to do likewise. Can you just imagine for a second the impact that could have on a local church? That level of loving authenticity among one another, how cared for you might feel if you were part of such a transforming community. You can see how this can generate, deepen, transforming community. What a place. I think many modern people, you may know them, you may be one yourself, maybe many modern people are skeptical about Christians because they will say, well, their truth claims, what they say they believe, and how they behave is rarely the same. They're just as bad as the rest of us, except they go to church on a Sunday. That's what they can say. And sometimes they have a point. They say the Christians is just a front, it's just an act, it's just a setup. And yet the irony is that we live, broadly speaking, in a culture that values and craves authenticity. Particularly in our younger generations. A desire to touch something and experience something that is real, that is meaningful, that is rich, that is truth with a capital T. And yet the best that the world seems to be able to offer is this fake, faux authenticity. Fabricated. For example, on social media, it's a key way that we see this being fleshed out. I don't know if you're on social media. Probably most of you are in some form or other. But particularly those that social medias that prioritize video or image. Quite often the images that we like to project are just hey, this is just me. This is just me naturally. Take me as you find me. I just like to wear my heart on my sleeve. Oh, you just caught me looking awesome. Whoopsie. These candid photographs. And sometimes it's all a bit of fun. But we have to understand how carefully crafted and manipulated all these photos are and all our videos are. We want to look the best. We want to project a certain thing about ourselves. We spend more time editing our photos than we do enjoying the memories that are behind them. It's hardly authentic, is it? And yet in the local church, according to the Apostle Paul here, in this transforming community that we're seeing a glimpse of today, people can be truly authentic because of the gospel. People in transforming community do not need to present a fake version of themselves for the sake of other people around them or for the sake of themselves. They don't need to do that. They don't need to come to church or be engaged in some way and sort of project this idea they have it all together. Or that they have to contrive something or they have to, play a certain role in order to be accepted. That's not transforming community. Why is that? Well, in the gospel, when we look at Jesus and we hear of what he's done for us, we see that we are worse and more broken and more sinful than we actually realize. Than even our worst secrets. We're worse than those. But in that same gospel, because of Jesus, we are more accepted and loved and validated than we can ever dream of. And it is that drives us to be authentic, gives us the power. So the first attribute that builds transforming community is authenticity. Would you describe yourself as an authentic person, particularly when it comes to church? The second attribute is missionality. That's a made-up word that I made up when I prepared this sermon. If authenticity deals with our inner aspects, our heart, our motivation, our beliefs, let's say, then I think missionality focuses on its outworking. Okay? It's how we are in the world. So let's, for example, look at verse 8. It's amazing. So, he says, being affectionately desirous of you, just allow those two words to sink in. Affectionately desirous of you. We were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. Wow. That's how you know, by the way, that you have joined an authentic, transforming community and that you are yourself authentic. when you can share not only the gospel, but our lives? I love this term, by the way. We had to pause on that. Affectionately desirous. It's just delicious. It's delightful. It's very archaic. We probably wouldn't say, well, maybe we should. If you're married to your spouse, I'm affectionately desirous of you today, darling. In other translations of the Bible, it says, we loved you so much that we not only shared the gospel, but we shared our lives. But I love this, affectionately desirous. It's the only time, actually, this term is used in the entire New Testament. So deep, Paul says, so deep was our desire, our affection, our love for you, that we shared the message of Jesus and we shared our lives with you too. So we not only preach and explain the gospel, as important and helpful and necessary as that is, but we demonstrate the gospel with our lives. We are an example of the gospel. Paul says elsewhere, imitate me as I'm imitating Jesus. Similar idea here. We can see the key, can't we, to what he's saying here is this relationship, this tenderness, this love, this parental love. So we get no sense whatsoever here of Paul, the big man, standing on some podium addressing hundreds of thousands of people. That was not his calling. Others can, but we don't get that here. He wasn't delivering his wonderful prepared speeches to the adoring masses and then scurrying off to the green room just to go and be on his own, to have a private sort of, massage and, whatever, and fancy drinks. That's not Paul. He says, I shared my life with you. And so that necessitates, doesn't it, closeness and proximity. You can't share your life from the stage. Like a father, like a mother. It implies frequent contact, right? Familiarity, this earthy homeliness. He's in deep with his people. He is in their lives, and they are in his. This relationship is born out of a context of authenticity. He says in verse 9, for you remember, saying to the church, you remember our labor and toil. We worked night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you, while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. He says this quite a few times, actually. Remember this. Don't you remember that time? Remember when I was with you? He's pointing out not something new, but calling them to remember what he was like with them. What was he like? Well, he labored and toiled. He worked hard when he was among them. Yes, he worked hard for the preaching of the gospel, but there's also a different kind of working and toiling that he was doing. He goes on to say that he could have expected support from the church, financial support, material support, such as lodgings or expenses. That was his right and his privilege as an apostle. Called by Christ uniquely for his mission. You see that in verse 6. But instead, as a part of this apostolic team, this servant-hearted, loving, affectionately desirous team, it says that he was self-supporting. He labored and toiled. And we know from Acts 18, verse 3, that Paul was a tent maker. I suppose an artisan, we could call him. Someone who was skilled at working with leather. And he used his skill in order to fund his mission and his ministry. And we see him do that in Corinth, in Acts 18. It served this practical purpose, he says in verse 9, not to be a burden to any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. As we get this picture of him taking off the pressure from the fledgling churches in order for them to become fully established and rooted, he found alternate ways to fund his mission, to get some money together. And we were doing that, he says, while we proclaimed, verse 9, while we proclaimed to you the gospel of God. One commentator points out that these two Greek words that are summed up, working night and day and proclaiming to you, they're both in the continuous tense. They're both ongoing. Working night and day, proclaiming to you. Working night and day, proclaiming to you. This commentator was suggesting that they are both happening at the same time in Paul's ministry. And this is interesting because it suggests that his work was not only about funding his apostolic mission, keeping the lights on, keeping, the food coming, and not drawing from the church. Yes, it was that, but his work was also a part of his gospel mission. Working night and day, proclaiming to you, working night and day. He worked and he proclaimed at the same time. In other words, his work was his mission. He was on mission at work. So when he chose to set up his shop, his artisan, found some work in the local marketplace or whatever, he did that so that he might continue his mission. The modern term for that, we say today, or these days, is bivocational. 2 callings. Two jobs. And that seems to be Paul's tactic here, particularly when he came to Thessalonica. And we could just maybe imagine with our mind's eye, people coming and going, bringing their leather goods or whatever it was that he was doing. As he plied his trade, they came to him for fixes and repairs and to create something or whatever he did with all of that. But at the same time, as they did that, he would be talking, he'd be chatting to the other, tent makers, he would be talking to his clients, his customers, reasoning with them, talking about the faith. You can imagine the tea brewing in the background. It seems to be that Paul purposely put himself in a place where he would be among people. For the sake of the gospel, to be a presence among them. This isn't church on Sunday. This is what happens out in the workplace. And Paul was very intentional about that. It says he started in Thessalonica in the synagogues, the Jewish place of worship, but eventually he seemed to spend more time in the smaller, less formal settings, the workshop, people's homes, one-to-ones. Anything that he could do to bring the riches of the gospel of Jesus Christ to bear on anyone who would listen to him. And so we get this picture very clearly here that Paul and his team were missional. And so again, I hope you can start to see how this missionality, this intentional positioning of yourself in a situation or a place where people are, you can see how that can build transforming community as well. And the point that I want to try and get to this morning is that for transforming community to work, we need both together. Authenticity, missionality. Otherwise, we are imbalanced as a church, as a community. If we're all about authenticity but no mission, we become ineffective. If we're all about mission but no authenticity, then we become suspicious. People start to wonder, what is it you really want? They just see Jesus as something we're trying to sell. So why did Paul then seek to model both to the church and therefore to us this morning as we are reading his words? Why did he seek to model both of these attributes to the church? Well, I think the point is, hopefully you're getting this, is that he expects the church to imitate him. He expects them to follow his example. His teaching, yes, hold to that, but also his life, model that. He wants members of the transforming community to go and do likewise. I'll put it in the negative. If we don't own authenticity and missionality, we will not see a transforming community growing among us here at Foundation Church. We might be many things and do many things and say many things, but if we lack these two attributes, we won't be heard because we're not being missional. Or if we are heard, we won't be believed because we're not being authentic. We need both. So how can we learn from Paul here? How can we respond as a church in order to develop this transforming community more and more? How can we take practical steps? I find this is a very challenging text. Not to understand it necessarily, but to allow it to do the work in me, to change me. And to make it difficult for you too, I'm going to apply it very specifically, very practically, and I hope this will help you. I've got some slides. There are 3 ways that you could consider anyway what being authentic and missional might mean for you. The first is this: consider your proximity and presence. In other words, think for a second. Who is around you? Who is around you? We all exist in circles of life, don't we? Your work circle, if you are employed. Your family circle. Your friend circle. Even your social media circle. There's overlap, but often they're different. Even your social circles, your recreation or leisure or sport or whatever it is you do to relax, etc., etc., etc. You will have regular contact with more people than you realize. Maybe 50 regularly, maybe 100. It will vary, I know that. But what will it mean for you to be authentic and missional in those circles? Authentic about your faith, authentic about living for Jesus. How will you be authentic and missional in these circles? Think about this. How will you move from simply being an acquaintance with someone to being a friend with someone? We can't be best friends with everybody. I know that. But how can we move from simply being all right at work or on the driveway or whatever, just waving to our... How do we go from that level of acquaintance to a sort of relationship where we can genuinely and truly share our lives and share the gospel? And I think here, one of the key tools, in fact, not the tool, but certainly a key one here to help us is hospitality. I think hospitality is so key for mission. I think it's so key for you in the world, for us as a church, hospitality. Coffee. It's usually food or drink related, isn't it? Coffee. Breaking bread. Going out for a cup of tea in the local cafe, whatever it happens to be. Hospitality is key. It's a key way for you to start showing your authenticity. That you're not just, a face. You have a life. You have a heart. You love the Lord. Authenticity. I think this has implications for us as a church as well. I continually think about and pray through with David, the other elder. The programs we run, our availability and presence in our local community. So these are challenges for us too. Consider your proximity and your presence. Second challenge then, about how we should apply being authentic and missional. Look at the bivocational option. Remember, Paul does both, works hard, preaches Christ, but does both at the same time. I think there are a number of approaches to how this could work out, if this is something you feel God is calling you to. By the way, this is what I have been doing for the last 14 years, working and also preaching and hopefully leading a bit as well of the church. But my work in the hospital and my work in the church has been overlap. There have been opportunities in my medical work for me to live as a Christian, to share the gospel, to talk about faith. I've run an Alpha course at work. No one asked me to do it, I just did it. I've married a couple at work, and I said, well, I'll marry you as long as I can preach the good news of Jesus at your wedding. They said, that's fine. The whole hospital turned out, and they all got to hear the gospel. So there you go. So little things like that, praise God, will be an option in this bivocational role. And as I mentioned, I've been doing this for 14 years, all glory to God, but this was a necessary thing for us to begin Foundation Church Belfast. We didn't have any money from outside, there was no outside funding at that time. There still isn't actually officially at this stage. We'd love to get some, and we're looking at that. But at the moment, it's just this self-funding thing. And this is all glory to God. It's not about me here. But this is a real strong option, I think, in today's world for us to earn some money, but also to plumb some significant time into ministry in the church, particularly for a church like us that wants to plant churches and strengthen churches and send missionaries to other parts of Belfast, just down the road. This is a wonderful option for us to be in the marketplace, in the world, making some money and developing those relationships and also ministering the gospel. Not just church planters or leaders or pastors, but administrators, those who lead other ministries, whether it's practical or spiritual, those who are developing systems and so forth. All of these are options when it comes to the bivocational role. And we saw in Paul's mission to the Thessalonians, that meant that his team were flexible. They could serve freely. They could support and start a fledgling church. That meant that they were able to multiply quicker as a result. So I wonder, is God calling you to think about a Paul-like bivocational option? Maybe he's calling you to find a job in the local area for you to intentionally connect with local people. Maybe he's leading you to think about being self-sufficient through part-time work so you can serve the church for a day or two per week. Third and final practical application then, number 3. Practice being affectionately desirous. Love that. Practice, that means do it. Don't forget, being affectionately desirous didn't spontaneously arise within Paul. He wasn't just one of the loving kinds, and he found that easy. Not at all. It rose within him because of Jesus. When he saw how much he had been loved by Jesus, and how Jesus gave his life to serve him and his church and to free him from his sins by going to the cross in his place, then Paul was driven to demonstrate his affectionate desire to the new believers in Thessalonica. And so that's the same for us. That is the grounds of our love. It's not an act. It's not a mask that we put on a Sunday. It is not a sales pitch. It is the sign of a changed heart. To the extent that you know that you are loved by God and freed and forgiven by him is the extent to which you will be affectionately desirous to one another. That's how we will learn to love those who are different from ourselves, who believe differently to us, who live differently to us. It's a sound grasp of the love of God through Jesus. And so the more we comprehend Jesus, the more we examine him, as it were, and learn of him and marvel at him and what he's done for us, the more we shall practice being affectionately desirous to one another. Look around yourself. Even just now, have a little quick look out the corner of your eye. Who can you encourage? Even here this morning, who can you encourage? Who can you strengthen? Who can you bless? Who can you demonstrate love for in practical terms? Let's pray.